Welcome everyone to the WNBA's Author Talk with Susan Meissner. My name is Julie Frey. I'm a member of the Greater Philadelphia chapter of the WNBA, and I serve as the WNBA's Communications Chair. I have the privilege of hosting today's interview alongside Jennifer Holmes, who is our VP of our Los Angeles chapter and leads our Bookwoman Book Club. Today we are thrilled to welcome Susan Meissner. Susan is a critically acclaimed author of over 20 books, and her engaging stories feature memorable characters facing unique and complex circumstances, often against a backdrop of historical significance. A multi-award winning author, her books have earned starred reviews in both Publishers Weekly and Booklist, and she's won and nominated for lots of awards. She's pretty amazing. You should stick around. If you're joining us on Zoom, feel free to write any questions you have in the Q&A. If you're on Facebook, you can leave questions in the comments and I'll try to look at them at the end. So to begin, hi, Susan. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Well, we're so excited to have you. To get things started, for those who are not familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Well, I'm a native of San Diego, California, which is where I am right now. We've lived other places, and I'm very thankful for those times where we've been able to try out different cultures. And we had some years in Europe, which was wonderful, and my husband was active duty Air Force. And I've been married to the same wonderful guy for a whole bunch of years, and we have 4 adult children, and we're starting to do the grandparent thing, which is so much fun. We have 3 littles and 1 on the way. They're kind of spread out all over the place, so it's always wonderful when we get to see them. And when I'm not writing, I like to cook. I wouldn't say I'm wonderful at it, but I like it. And I love my dog, and I like succulents and gardening. I'm also not very good at gardening either, but I do love it. I do like being out. I've killed a lot of plants, but I still keep trying.
It's important to have that dedication. Jen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. What did you do before you became an author?
You know, I've always loved to write, always. And I think in my younger years, like my teens and my 20s, when you're starting to decide what you want to do with your life, I thought of my writing as a hobby. And I kind of kept it as a hobby. And I thought of it as therapy for me for the end of the day or when I'm needing an escape from real life. So I didn't even consider making it my career, which is kind of dumb. I think now when people ask, I say, if there's something you love to do, why don't you just see if that's what you're meant to do with your career too? Because you really can do what you love and not grow tired of it. But it wasn't until my 30s that I actually got a job writing for money. I started working at a newspaper because all the kids were in school and I had some free time. And I thought, you know, I could just dabble in writing. I didn't have a journalism degree, but they hired me anyway. And I found that I just loved it. And I ended up working full time for that newspaper in time, and they promoted me. And I think because I was finally doing what I was meant to do, yeah. I learned really quickly, even having not gone to journalism school. So by the time 10 years had passed and I was now in my 40s, I realized, you know, if I'm going to try writing a novel, which I've always wanted to do, I'd better try it now, or I'm always going to wonder if I could have, would have, should have. So I did. I wrote my first one and I was 42 years old, but I'm so glad I did because it's my lane and I haven't left it since.
I think it's important for people to have life experience to get them to the point where they're going to do whatever they're meant to do. We don't all go to graduation of high school and say, tomorrow I'm going to be a star, or I'm going to actually like earn an income. We don't have those big plans about who we actually are that actually come true right away. So many times we have to wait to see who we become.
And especially with fiction, I'm finding that the more life I live, the more I understand what it means to live a life. Mm-hmm. And I can inject more into my characters to make them seem more real, because my characters are also living life. And so that the longer I live, the more I appreciate life experience.
That's great. We have a member, I believe she's in the Los Angeles chapter. I think, I can't remember her name right now, but she's 90 years old. And she told me a few weeks ago that she wrote her first book when she was 80. So, wow. So everybody has time to write that book. And she's written bestsellers since then. So like, you can find your passion and your dream at any point in your life.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Were you a bookish kid when you were growing up?
I would say yes. I didn't think of it as being bookish because it was such a normal part of life in my house, because there were books everywhere in my house. My parents were always avid readers. We always had like bookshelves in every room in the house. So it didn't seem to me to be booky because it seemed normal.
Right.
But I realize now that is not normal to have bookshelves in every room in the house. And so I feel like my parents kind of gave that to me as a gift, a love for books. And so I always had a library card. I was always using my library card. And I kind of grew up on Laura Ingalls Wilder and Nancy Drew and fantastic books, but like The Island of the Blue Dolphins is just a perennial favorite. Everything that E.B. White wrote. So yes, I would say that I had the great fortune of being raised by parents who taught me to love books just by loving them themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a great gift that we get when we have parents or people in our lives, not necessarily parents, but who nurture that. Mm-hmm. I think you do a little bit of nurturing with your volunteer work, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I do want to find a way to give back. And that's one way I can do it is to give back out of the gifting that I have. And so there's a nonprofit here in San Diego that reaches out to at-risk youth with ways to engage them with reading and writing. And so I do a writing component. So we'll read a book together separately. And then I go in afterward into the classroom and we do a writing project with prompts related to the book that was just read. And so we're not meeting right now, unfortunately, because of COVID, but I'm hoping that we turn a corner here pretty soon and we can get back in the classroom.
Well, that's a special gift that you're giving to those kids. We all need those people in our lives who help us and show us different ways that we can explore the world.
Yeah, I feel like anytime we have a chance to mentor somebody who is at the place where you used to be is a great way to use your life experience. And especially with these kids, they're living an at-risk kind of life. And so I think they feel like their voice doesn't count, like they don't really have a voice. And your writing always allows you to exercise your voice. And so that's what I love most about it, is helping them recapture a sense of confidence that they have something to say.
That's really great. Did you have any teachers that helped you along the way?
I did. I had two in particular. One was in elementary school. She has since passed away, but she gave me a little journal to write in when I was in her class. I think I was second grade, and she only gave that little red journal to me. I don't recall her giving one to anyone else that day. I think she saw something in me and realized that, oh, that Susie girl, she's always at her desk writing when she has free time. I can't think of why else she might have done that. And so I attribute that love for writing to her. And then I had a ninth grade English teacher here in where I went to high school in the same area here, who affirmed that love that I had. So I would turn in an assignment to him and he would have all kinds of great comments about my writing. And he really gave me, I would say, the boost I needed much later in life, because I didn't fall back on it until my 40s, but I remembered all that information that he gave me. And I dedicated one of my novels to him, and he's still living. He's 90 now, but we get together for coffee whenever we can. And it's just wonderful to be able to share that with him, because I feel like if you're a teacher, you have no idea the amount of impact you can have on a child's life. And it might just be that child who's now grown up doesn't know how to contact you. I'm grateful that I was able to reach out to that teacher. I knew where he was, and we could reconnect after 40 years. Yeah. And I tell him, you had such an impact on me.
And I'm sure that means the world to him. Teaching is a thankless job, so when you do get thanked, I'm sure it means even more.
Yes, definitely.
Susan, what made you decide to write historical fiction?
You know, I realized that I just loved it. I think I came at it kind of by accident. I was writing a book in 2008. Actually, it came out in 2008. So I was writing it in 2006 and 2007. It's called The Shape of Mercy. It's my first historical novel. It's my first dual timeline novel where I incorporate a historical story with a contemporary story, and they collide somehow. And then I wrote a bunch of those after that. But I wrote that one because I had this idea, and it was that kind of book, a dual timeline kind of book. And after I wrote it, and I got some really good reviews, a nice starred review from PW and some other really nice accolades, I realized, oh my gosh, this is probably something I should keep doing because I love it. And it seems to be resonating with critics and readers. So I just stayed with it. And right now, I can't imagine writing anything else. I feel like I've kind of found my wheelhouse, and it feels really good to be in it.
So we
And
shouldn't expect any science fiction from you?
Every now and then I'll get an idea for maybe a little bit of magic realism, but I feel like I can add that to a historical setting, and it'll still kind of fill my need to, to write historical fiction, and also kind of stay in my genre, because I know readers kind of like it when you find your spot and then they know where to find you. And so as long as I can make my readers and my publishers happy, I'm open to injecting some interesting things into historical fiction.
Well, and how do you find or come about the topics of what you're going to write your book about? Do you read something and then you start researching and it's just something that you find really interesting, so you decide to build this book around that? How does the idea come to you?
Yeah, they've come to me in all different ways, kind of like what you just said. I'll stumble across something and I'll go, like it'll be like a historical event or a person who lived in a historical time, and I'll read something about them or something they've written or whatever, and I'll just think to myself, oh, I've never heard that before, or I didn't know that had happened. And it'll send me down oftentimes into the rabbit hole of research and discovery, which is actually a lot of fun. Sometimes I will be somewhere else doing something else, and somebody will say something that will do that. That happened with the last year of the war, actually. I was on Ellis Island for a completely different book. I was there for A Fall of Marigolds, which is a book I wrote that is set on Ellis Island in the hospital buildings there. And we were about to do a book club event, doing a tour of the hospital buildings. And the docent and I, we were kind of waiting for everybody to get ready. So he and I were just talking, and he said, hey, did you know that German Americans were interned on Ellis Island during World War II? And I didn't know they had been interned at all in America in World War II. I only knew about the Japanese American experience. And I said, no. And he said, yeah, they were. Not only that, but there was this camp in Crystal City, Texas, where a whole bunch of German Americans and their American-born children were sent. And of those, more than 1,800 were repatriated, sent back to Germany in prisoner exchanges that were secret with their American-born children. And when he told me that, I thought, oh my gosh, I've never heard that. And that's my kind of story, because it's a story about ordinary people being thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And I thought, I've got to find out more. So I went home from New York and did that. I went down into the rabbit hole, and that's where the idea for the last year of the war came out.
What are your favorite things about researching? What do you like to do? Do you like to dive into the nonfiction books? Do you like primary sources? What gets you going?
I really want to look at it all. I trust the primary sources, and I trust the books that have been written from kind of an academic kind of view, because I can trust the information. And I feel like I owe it to my readers to give you as accurate a view of history with my fictional people as I can. I feel like people are trusting me to tell them it could have happened just like this, because it did happen just like this to a real person. You know, my characters are almost always fictional, but I put them in places and times and situations that really happened. So I feel like I owe it to you to make it as accurate as I can. And so I do look for those primary sources and kind of more academic looks at what happened. But then I also will look for memoirs written by people who lived it. And sometimes those memoirs are skewed by the person's experience. You know, they were emotionally involved. And so what happened to them may not be what happened to everybody, but it happened to them. And so I'll read as many memoirs as I can get my hands on. If I can meet a live witness and chat with them, I do that. Sometimes I find them on Facebook, which I've done twice. I've met people that have lived the event, like with Crystal City. I found a man on Facebook he was 5, 6, and 7 when he was at Crystal City with his parents, and he remembered it. And so when I had a question about anything, I knew I could reach out to him on Facebook Messenger, and he would answer me right away. It was really great. So I look for those live witnesses, and I also look for biographies, autobiographies, and if I can visit the place, if it seems like it would help me, I will visit the place. But like Crystal City, I did not go because it's not there. The city of Crystal City is there, but the internment camp is gone. There's nothing left of it now but cement foundations. And so I can't visit it physically, but I visited it in my mind by talking to people and looking at all the pictures on the National Archives and watching documentaries. So I think all of those ways are ways that I can craft a story that rings true, starting with academic sources and all the way to, talking to those live witnesses if they are still living.
Do you often get, letters or messages from people who have read your books and said, oh, my parents or myself, or people who have reached out and, been touched by your story? Or
that's actually one of the more gratifying things about writing historical fiction, is that you're telling the story of someone's family member, and it may be a different way, but it parallels their own family member or their own story. So I've even had people come up to me. I did a book event here in San Diego, and a Japanese man came up to me and said, I was at Crystal City. I was there. I was in 7th grade. And it happened again in Dallas when I was doing a book event for this book. A Japanese woman came up to me and said the same thing. She was at Crystal City. And so right away we had a connection, and we didn't even know each other. And, sometimes I'll write a book where, like the book that I wrote, that the backdrop is the Spanish flu pandemic. And so As Bright as Heaven, there are more people reading it now, I think because of that. So I'm still getting emails from people that are telling me I lost my great grandma to the 1918 pandemic, or they might write and say, I had no idea that that's what took my great granddad. It was the flu, and no one ever talked about it. They didn't talk about it. And that's kind of what happened back then, is after that flu lifted, and it was a flu, it did lift like all flus do. People just kind of shut the door on it because it was so terrible. What we're facing now is awful, but the Spanish flu pandemic was exponentially worse. And I think that's what happened with that generation, is they had endured so much, a terrible war. I mean, World War I was awful. And these men were all coming home with shell shock and missing limbs. It was just terrible. And then you have the flu on top of it, and they both ended at the same time. And so I think when 1919 turned around, they just said, shut the door on all that. So no one ever talked about it anymore. So I get a lot of emails from people saying that they realized they lost that family member to flu, but no one ever talked about it.
Well, I think it's really important with historical stuff in general that you're touching people's lives by telling them about something that they may not know about, but also by something, like you said, that their family member may have experienced or something. I remember for me, my grandfather was a scout in World War II. And I remember watching Band of Brothers and seeing just what a scout was doing. And yeah. It was like, I knew he had been in jeopardy. In fact, my sister and I both did National History Day, and she got to interview him about his experiences. And he had never told anyone this, but he told her how he was like, his hair was so blonde, they called him Cotton. And US forces thought he was a German spy. And so they held him prisoner. And it wasn't until someone who he had been at boot camp with said, no, he's from Maryland, that he was let go. And so hearing those stories, like, I knew that he had been in danger, but just seeing like what a scout was expected to do just really opened my eyes and made me feel so much more for my grandfather in a different way. And I think with your books, you give so many people experiences that they can relate to in some way personally, but then also have that historical context that maybe gives them insight into what their grandparents or their parents went through. And that's a very special thing you do for people.
Thanks. I think that's one of the huge benefits of reading historical fiction, is that nonfiction will give you what happened, but historical fiction will let you feel what happened. It's the experience of living it that sometimes even narrative nonfiction can't do for you, but fiction can. It can take what happened and make it seem like an event that you can experience without having to time travel and without having to put yourself in danger, to live it in a way.
It's a huge empathy builder.
I totally agree.
Well, tell us about The Last Year of the War. Tell us.
Well, if you haven't read it yet, it's a book about identity and loyalty and friendship. the bonds of family love. And I could have gone in a number of different ways with this book after having the idea kind of planted in my head after I left Ellis Island. But I decided to focus on a girl who's she's just 13, 14 when her father is arrested, believed to be a German sympathizer. He's a German immigrant, so is her mother, and he's innocent, but he can't prove it because loyalty is something you have in your heart and no one can look into the human heart. And so she's kind of on the edge of becoming the adult she's going to be. You know, those teenage years are rather formative. And so when her father's arrested, you know, they're living in Iowa, and he's not returned to them. And the community they live in begins to think, well, if that dad is innocent, wouldn't he come home? And when he doesn't come home, they begin, this family, her mother, her little brother, they began to feel like they're not who they've always been. And so that's kind of like the first assault on her identity is people begin to treat her differently. And then of course they are interned as a family in Crystal City. And again, she feels that pull on her identity because she doesn't feel like a German girl. She was born in Iowa and she doesn't even speak German. You know, she speaks English, but she meets a Japanese girl from Los Angeles and they're so alike. I mean, they like all the same things. And what makes them different, of course, is just their heritage, but everything else is about them is the same, and they find great friendship in each other. And that friendship with Mariko is what galvanizes Elise and helps her hold on to this kind of fragile tether she has to her identity. And then, of course, the family's repatriated to Germany in a prisoner exchange. They go to Germany in like the worst possible time, January 1945. You know, the Allies are bombing Germany every night, and that's the world they go back to. And so she doesn't feel like a German girl there. In fact, she feels more like the enemy rather than anything else. She feels American, sounds American. She's not allowed to speak for fear that they will think that, you know, she is an American. And so the whole book really is about not only the identity part of it, like who are you really? Are you who you say you are, or do you have your identity imposed on you by other people? And then the relationships that she has with her parents. Her father's a great guy, he really is, but he can't stop what's happening to his family. He speaks into her life, tries to, you know, help her remember who she is. Mariko does that for her. They are separated, of course, because Elise is repatriated and Mariko is repatriated to Tokyo, and they lose contact with each other. And she meets other people along the way. I won't say who because it'll spoil it if you haven't read it yet. But she meets other people and friends that she makes. Some are more helpful than others. And she's looking to all of them. Tell me who I am. And even when the book opens, she's an old woman. She's about to tell you her story. And she's just found out that she has Alzheimer's, which is an identity-stealing disease. And she's also just found out that Mariko is alive and living in San Francisco, and she's in LA, and they haven't spoken in 60 years. And so, she wants to see her before her identity is swept away completely, because there's no coming back from Alzheimer's. And so I feel like it's kind of a look at who we are when we don't know who we are, and how we find our way back to our identity. Who helps us remember who we are, or speak into us so that we can reattach ourselves to who we are.
Now, do you have some of your slides of the camps and things that you can show everyone?
I do. Do you want me to try and share my screen with you?
Yes. Okay.
So I'm going to go kind of quickly through some of these first few slides, so that because I've talked about some of these already, and so I'm just going to skip through them rather quickly. This is an internment camp in California. We still have one that you can visit. This is the book that man on Ellis Island was reading, and he told me about, and I came home from New York and read it, and that's where I formed most of my, the basis of my research for this book. I'm going to skip through some of these. This is Roosevelt signing the declaration that allowed the West Coast to become a military area. You can see this is from Washington all the way into Arizona. This is the whole area where Japanese Americans were evacuated out of the West Coast. And you can see Crystal City there at the very, kind of at the lower third of Texas, right there by the Mexican border. That is where the Crystal City internment camp was. And these are 3 little boys at the camp in Manzanar. I know the screen probably is in the way of those numbers, but it allows you to see how many people were interned in the US during World War II. It's about 32,000 people in total who were interned for the duration of the war. And it is about 12,000 German Americans. Now this person is how I imagine Elise. It's not really Elise because Elise isn't real, but I imagine her looking like this. She's lives in Iowa. She's German heritage, and she's the firstborn girl, so she has a lot of the traits that a firstborn girl has. And she meets Mariko, who is the girl you see on the cover of the book, and you can see them running across what looks like kind of a barren landscape. That is sort of what Texas can look like in the summertime. And you can see that they're running as if they're having fun and not running from danger. And of course, at the camp was the first time in quite a while that actually Elise found some happiness, because she had Mariko as a friend to kind of help her stay grounded in truth rather than all of these other accusations that were coming her way. This is the aerial view of the actual camp. So this is the internment camp. And if you've read the book, you'll know that the internees were allowed to build a swimming pool. They were able to take an irrigation pond and dredge it. It was full of snakes and everything terrible. And that is that circle there in the upper left-hand corner. They were able to dredge it, put in a filtration system, and they had this wonderful swimming pool. It was like one of the most wonderful things to have at the camp, because it is in Southwest Texas, super hot, and they didn't have any other luxuries except for that pool. The rectangle that you see there to the right is the orange grove. So it was a real orange grove. I used it in the book. If you've read the book, you'll know that Mariko's father worked in that orange grove taking care of the beehives. And then here is the school, the K through 12 federal school that I had Elise go to. On the weekends, it served as a worship center. And all those buildings behind it are different dwelling units. So they had duplexes and quadruplexes and triplexes, victory huts. And the way I described the unit that Elise and her family lived in was pretty accurate for the size of their family. There were 4 people in their family, and they had about 500 square feet. I know you can't see it really well, but there are 2 men on horseback in this picture, and they are armed. They have rifles across their waists. They are walking the perimeter of the fence. The fence is barbed wire. It is 12 feet high. There are 4 guard towers. It was lit 24/7, and everybody knew that if you tried to escape the internment camp, you would be shot. And in the 6 years it was operational, no one ever tried to escape. This is what it looked like on the inside. Here are just 3 little Japanese children playing in the dirt. The conditions were a little austere. It was not a whole lot of green things in that part of Texas. And there were no cars to speak of except for the military vehicles. So it was kind of a safe place for kids to play. And actually, the people that I've talked to who are still living, they were all children of interned parents. All the parents are gone now. And they don't remember it being terrible because their parents tried to keep it as positive as they could. And they remember it being hot, but fun. They had fun because they were able to play in the dirt. They didn't have to worry about cars, and there were no other extraneous dangers except for rattlesnakes and scorpions. But for the most part, they remember it was okay to be a child there because they didn't know that their parents were kind of imprisoned there, and that there was fencing around them and that they couldn't leave ever. So you didn't have to work at the camp. That went against Geneva Convention rules, but everybody at the camp was encouraged to find something you like to do and do it. And if you did, you would be paid 10 cents an hour in camp currency. So that little green disc that you see there is made of cardboard. And it was only legal tender on the camp, but you could earn money like this, working in the sewing room, which is what I had Elise's mother do, earning 10 cents an hour, making clothes. Like for new babies, there were 150 some babies born at Crystal City, and people outgrew their clothes got torn. And so everybody who found a job on the camp was paid 10 cents an hour. These are pictures of 2 of the different schools. There was that K through 12 federal school, but there were also the Japanese language school and the German language school. These were taught by internees who may or may not have been teachers on the outside. And the little boy on the far right of the picture that's most forward to you, there's a little boy on the far right. He's kind of smiling. He's really cute. That man is the man who I met on Facebook, who's now upwards of 80, living on Long Island, and his name was Werner. And he's the one that helped me whenever I had a question. He would reach out. I would reach out to him on Facebook, and he would answer me. There's a little picture of some Japanese nursery school students on your right, a little bit covered up by the strip of pictures. The K through 12 school, they tried to keep it as normal as possible. They had their own newspaper, they had a yearbook, they had class photos, they even had a prom, and they had football games. And if you're wondering who they just played other internees. They would get the youngest internees and say, will you please come play these high school students? And they would. They had an orange team and a blue team. I think the orange team were the actual students and the blue team were young internees who would play these kids so that they could have football games on Friday nights. The repatriations really happened. There were 2 of them at Crystal City, one in 1944 and one in January of 1945. And the one in 1945 is the one I used for my family. And this picture is from that repatriation. So this family is out processing from Crystal City. You can see the little boy has a little tag around his neck, that lapel tag he had to wear the entire time. It identified him as a repatriate. And it might be hard to see, but there, that's a little excerpt from the instructions to the guards. And you can see one of them says that they will not be allowed to speak to anybody en route. So they would get on a train in Uvalde, Texas. The shades would be drawn, just like I have it in the book, and they weren't allowed to talk to anybody. No newspapers, no access to radio, nothing. So that when they got on the ship, the same ship, this is the same picture of this ship that I had my fictional family be aboard. They had no access to any kind of update on the war. So my feeling is that they did not know that the Axis powers were losing the war. By January of 1945, you probably know your history. The Axis powers, they were losing the war. In fact, by May, 5 months later, it was going to be over. But they could not have known this. They might have known D-Day had already happened, but I don't think they knew to the degree that the Allies were winning. Now, this is a picture now of what Crystal City looks like now. Remember when I said there's nothing left but cement slabs? Well, this is one of them. When the war ended, the land was sold, and Crystal City Unified School District bought part of it, and Crystal City, the municipality, bought the rest of it, and they made an airport. And so this right here is part of the school. So you're looking at some tennis courts and an athletic field, and there's a couple of cement foundations that they left as a memorial to the internment camp. There are also these placards, there's 7 of them in the dirt, that if you go there and want to see what had been there, because all the buildings are gone, there are these placards that kind of tell you this is what was here on this site during World War II. And if you're wondering if anybody ever comes back, well, they did have a reunion not too long ago. This was about 10 years ago. And most of these people are children of the parents who were repatriated, because we're getting on in years now. It's over 75 years. So a lot of these are the grown-up children of those repatriated parents. And they come back, I think, every now and then to kind of remember what happened there. Because for the most part, everybody that was sent to Crystal City was innocent. Nobody was ever charged with a war crime of any kind. And that's the book. And so I'm gonna click off of this, and we can get back to any kind of questions you might have about that or anything else.
Susan, I remember you telling us at book club that there is here in California, I think you said out by Bishop, there's another camp. And is that one semi-intact, and have you been there?
Yeah, that's the one at Manzanar. That's the one at the very beginning of my slides. And that's the only picture I have of it. I have not been, to my utter shame, I have not been, because it is about 5.5 hours away. And I've driven past it, but have never stopped. And this was much earlier in my life. And so now I'm on a mission the next time I go up to the Sierra Nevada mountains, because that's where it is. It's in the middle of nowhere at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains. I'm gonna stop. But Manzanar is one of the few internment camps where they left it. They didn't save all the buildings, but they saved 2, and they built an interpretive center. So now when you go and stop, you can see not only a couple of the actual buildings, but they have an interpretive center to show you what it was like to live there, to be interned there.
I couldn't help but wonder, as you were showing us all those amazing slides, Are you an author who does Pinterest to gather all of your resources? I know a lot of historical writers have a Pinterest board with all of their inspiration. It's so cool seeing this is the photo that inspired this part of the book or this character. It's a lot of
Yeah,
fun
I
for
wish
us.
I did because I tried to do that once with one book that I wrote, and I guess I'm not good at it because I just kind of failed at it, and I thought, you know, I'm not good at this. And I have learned that when you're working with social media, you have to find the 2 or 3 that you're good at and do those. And so I do Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I don't do Pinterest very much except for saving recipes. So so none of my research photos end up on my Pinterest boards, but I do prepare a slide presentation like this for every one of my books so that when I do book events like this or live events, I have a tiny little projector that I can bring to any kind of venue. So I am able to show the pictures that I gleaned in my research when I speak to book clubs. And so that kind of makes up for my lack of having anything good to
I
say
think it's
on my
fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
And then do you put those pictures up? Do you have them where you write so that you can see those and get inspiration, you know, off of those photos?
Yeah, I usually have I'm really old school. I want a notebook. And so I'll print out or I'll send them up to have them be developed. I'll send them up to Costco and have the film lab develop them so that I can have them at the ready. And I put them all in a notebook. And so whenever I need to refer to something, I just kind of flip through and I have pictures and I have things I've printed out, articles, and I save a lot of links too. I have both an electronic file. Some things I want it printed out. I want to look at it. I want to be able to read it. I don't want it to be inaccessible to me if I don't have Wi-Fi. And so I'm still using the notebook, which I know it's so archaic, but you know, they say if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'm going to stick.
We all have our ways that we work best. And when you can find those, it's best to use them. Your books are you just create such vivid worlds for readers. And obviously you do so much research in order to do that. And I love how you said that you really want to get the whole picture of a situation before you write about it so that you can present it as a real world. But within that, you have big themes. You don't shy away from big themes. You're not a cutesy little writer. You talk about so many heartfelt things. What compels you to do that? I love that you do it. I just wonder, where do you get that drive?
No, I think part of it is that's what I want to read. I don't read, I guess I'm confessing here, but I don't read beach reads. I don't read romance. I don't know why, but I like a book that has teeth in it. And I know that means I'm going to get bitten and it's going to hurt a little, but I don't know what it is, but I'll watch something on Netflix that's fun. But if I'm reading something, I want it to impact me in a way. And so since that's what I read, I guess that's what I write. And I know that I'm writing to a particular kind of crowd. I write for book club people.
Right.
You know, you kind of have to pick your audience. It helps when you're, you know, selling your book, you know, to publishers who are going to acquire you. You need to know who your target audience is. And I know my target audience are people just like you. You are members of a book club. And or you like a book club kind of book, and maybe you don't have time in your life to be in a book club, but that's the kind of book you want. And that kind of book is the kind of book that you want to talk to somebody afterward. It's that kind of book. And so for me, that kind of book is the kind where there's some sort of moral dilemma or some, you know, deep thing or relationships. Human relationships are so complex, but they define us. And so I focus a lot on human relationships because of that. And because they're so complex and because they get to the heart of who we are. And so you're gonna get the messiness of life when that happens. And I think for me, it makes it easier to write when I know there's gonna be tension. If I was writing a lighter read where the tension was lighter, I think I would probably struggle to write that book. But when I'm writing about hard things like war and you know, pandemics and you know, the other hard things I've written about, I find that the tension is so organic that I don't struggle to find ways to make my characters strive. And characters have to strive for something or you have no book. And so when the tension is really organic like that, then I can focus on the character because the tension is already there.
I think that you have an ability to not just tug our heartstrings, but really make us think about those big issues. And calling back to what you said earlier about how you like to have ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, I think so many of us go through our lives as ordinary people who confront extraordinary circumstances. We may not face a global war, I pray we don't, but we all have those things in our lives that cause us sacrifice, loss. We feel love, we feel anger, all these big things that make this story universal to all of us. And I think you just do that beautifully.
Well, thank you. I feel like writers, I think I speak for a lot of writers that we kind of journal in our writing. Like I don't journal personally because I do it in my books. I process life in what I'm writing. And so I think that's why I'm drawn to issues that make us think, is because life is it's ponderous sometimes. We're living in a time right now that is ponderous. It's making us ponder a lot of different things. And I feel like, books that help you kind of do that is almost like helping you practice. It's like if you read a really good book about how hard it is but necessary to forgive, then you feel like you've experienced almost like a lesson that you can hide in your heart if you can remember it, because there may be a day where you have to forgive someone, and perhaps that book that you read 10 years ago will remind you of not only how to do it but why.
Well, even going the opposite way, we were talking in book club on Tuesday about a lot of these subjects that you write about, we may not have learned in school, or we may not remember that we learned in school. So it's such a amazing way to be able to re-educate ourselves about a topic, but then also get wrapped up in it and all of the feelings from the amazing characters that you have. I mean, I know as Bright as Heaven, I mean, I was bawling my eyes out because I was so connected, with the characters, with the girls. So it really is such a gift to be able to learn something that's in each of these things is so important. We shouldn't forget. We need to remember these things because they happened and they were important and they affected people, and we need to carry that on.
Right. I agree. I think in school, they have to decide how much to tell us, because there was so much, I feel like I didn't remember it, or we just didn't have time to get to it. But I really don't remember studying Spanish flu in high school when we were doing American history, or I don't remember touching on it at all. Maybe we did, but I don't remember it. And it ought not to be forgotten. Humanity took a terrible blow during that pandemic, and 50 million people died, and they should be remembered in some way. And if we forget it, it's almost like they didn't matter. So I do feel like historical fiction allows us to touch all of those subjects that kind of just got forgotten or pushed to the side because of other more important things. And it allows those untold stories to be told so that there is a way to remember them. I know with like World War II, which is still very popular for books right now. I'm glad it is, because I don't think we've told every story there is to tell. And I think it's important to tell those stories while we still have our living witnesses. But when you study World War II in high school and college, we study the big things. We study the Holocaust, Pearl Harbor, the war in the Pacific, maybe the Warsaw Ghetto and some other things, but it's hard to get to all the little stories. And even though it wasn't little what happened to these German Americans, it was 11,000 of them, and it was huge to them. And so historical fiction kind of allows us to tell the stories that we didn't get to hear when we were in school.
And to remember that though we have evolved beyond things, we have not evolved beyond things. These are universal things that, we can harken back to Shakespeare and beyond, and there's always been war. There's always been illness. There's always been so many things. And to continue to strive to remember that and to grow through that, I think is one of the important things about learning our history. and
Yes.
you enable people, because there are a lot of people. I mean, I am a history lover. I will sit there, like, I've been to the National Archives to look at things, and I love to dive in. But there are a lot of people who sat in history class in school and hated it. It was so boring. Oh, I just needed to remember dates and stuff. But when you have historical fiction, that gives them a story that they can relate to, a person they can relate to, and then it begins to matter to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think fiction always gives you the humanity of the event, where the historical class is almost always, but maybe not entirely, about the facts, but not so much the humanity. And the fiction is all about the humanity. So I think that's why what you just said is so very true.
When I know you mentioned that As Bright as Heaven, people are starting to take notice that maybe hadn't before. And I have to say, when this whole thing happened, with the COVID and the virus, it actually came to mind for me, because that book was so powerful to me. And it reminded me that, this something, of course that was terrible and it was worse and all of that, but it really kind of made you realize, like, these things have happened before in our history. We've survived those, but it was huge.
Yeah. I think one of the great things to take away from what happened in 1918, because as terrible as it was, we did recover, is if you look back, you can see that just a few years later, it was the Roaring 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Not a crazy time, but still, people were ready to be happy again. And the economy recovered and people were happy again. And so I look back and I think, I know what we're going through now is super hard, but I feel like if we just hang on and remain kind, I feel like kindness is taking a hit right now, because we're getting tired, and I'm seeing people being shorter with each other and unkind. I think we need to hold on to our kindness and hold on to each other. We're going to get through this.
Yeah.
Definitely. As a writer, through your books, do you feel that you have grown in different ways?
Definitely. I feel like each book I write, I learn a little something new about me. Like, for example, when I wrote The Shape of Mercy, which I mentioned, was my first historical. That one I still, even though it was more than 10 years ago, it was 13 years ago, I still feel like that book taught me things about myself that I wasn't expecting to find out, I guess. And that is that it's a book about a gal she's a college student, and she's taken on a job of transcribing a 400-year-old diary. And the diary is from somebody she's witnessing the Salem witch trials. And so my current day character is transcribing it, and she's got her own thoughts about what happened back in the late 1600s. And she doesn't realize that the same thing is happening all the time, still happens all the time, about how we rise to judgment and we follow the crowd and we follow our fears. So if fear becomes the motivator and following the crowd becomes the motivator, all of a sudden you have 19 dead people in Salem, Massachusetts, hung as witches, all of whom were innocent. Every single one was exonerated, every single one. But it was fear and the pull of the crowd that led to what happened there. And she's, my character is just thinking that it's not that way. I'm not that way. I don't rise to judgment. I don't follow my fear. I don't follow the crowd. And of course she's realizing that we all do that. If we're not careful, we will follow fear. And it's a huge motivator. And there's other motivators, and there's one that's equally as powerful, and that's love. Love is a motivator too. And I realized about myself that fear is right there. It is right there begging for my attention to follow it, because it's a motivator. And I have to hold on to love, because love will almost always help you make wise choices. Fear sometimes maybe helps you make the right choice, like running away from danger, but it almost always makes you make a hasty decision that is harmful to other people. And we're seeing it right now. all the time in our current day in 2020. And so that book was one that kind of taught me how about myself, that if I'm not careful, I will let fear motivate me. And I have to like actively make love my motivator. Love for other people.
That's a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
I hope the rest of the world hears you. Let's see.
I was going to ask you how you go about picking the names for your characters. And since it's historical fiction, I'm guessing you probably have to research what names were probably popular, then, I mean, right?
I do. And thankfully the census has lists that go back a long time about what names were given, like the 100 most popular names given to babies born in that year. So if I have a character who's 20 years old in 1910, I have to go back. Well, what names were being given away to baby girls in 1890? And a lot of them are the same for a long time. And so I usually look for one that I haven't used already, just to kind of keep it like not mixed up for my readers. And I pick ones that I kind of just like, I don't know, that I don't mind hearing or saying or seeing every day for a year or more. And so, and sometimes I think about what that name conjures. Like, you might have an image that comes to mind when you hear, like the word pearl, which is a name, and that image might be different than when you hear like the name Eunice. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with either name, but there might be a collective conjuring that we have when we hear the name Pearl and when we hear the name Eunice, or harder names like Agatha, you know what I'm saying? Right. So I do pay attention to how it sounds, how it might come across to the reader, so that there's never like a bump in the road. I don't want to, unless I'm going to use that to my advantage. Like I might give a hard sounding name like Agatha to a very soft character for a very specific reason. So all of that kind of comes into play.
What kind of writer are you? Are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
I like to say that I plot by the seat of my pants, which really just means I'm kind of a hybrid. So I do start out with a plan, what I would consider a semi-plotted plan. Like I'll start out with really, more than anything else, it's not a plot of this happens, this happens, this happens, but these are the people. And so I plot their identities, their psychologies, all of that, their backstory. I give them a history, because we all operate out of our history. I do things now because of how I was raised, and the same things are true of my characters. So I figure out who they are, what they've been through, where they went to school, if they have an Enneagram score, what it might be. Mm-hmm. I figure out my people, and that's kind of my plot, is I know the people, so that when I start writing, which is a little more intuitive, I have a general idea of where I'm going, so I kind of know how I want everybody to end up. But I don't know exactly how I'm going to get them all there. And that's the pantser part of it. But since I know them, I've already given them this backstory, and I write all of that down. When I start to write, I kind of feel like, well, if I've taken the Enneagram test for that character, and I know they're a 5, I know what they would do in this situation. And so that helps me write, helps me write intuitively, where I don't really have a plan, but I know the character, and so it's kind of a mix of both.
Gotcha. You lived abroad for a while, and you've written several books that have locations that are set abroad. Did any of your travels or your stays in certain areas inform any of the places in your books?
Definitely. When I was picking a place for Secrets of a Charmed Life, is about 2 sisters who experienced the London Blitz. When the children of London were evacuated to the countryside, I have these 2 sisters who sneak back into London, and they're separated on the day the Blitz starts. But I have them go to this beautiful little village in Gloucestershire, where they are sent for the evacuation. And I picked that place specifically because I had been there. And that to me was wonderful, is when I was thinking back, to my time, like when I was living there, I wasn't a writer. I wasn't thinking like a writer, but that place was very quaint and beautiful and peaceful. And so of all the places I could have put those two London sisters, I knew that's where they were going to go, to that place, because I remembered how it made me feel when I was there. And then the same thing in last year of the war, I could have had Elise and her family be sent anywhere, but I put them in the area of Germany where I was most familiar, because we lived there for a year and a half. And so Stuttgart, I never lived there, but we drove through often enough, so I knew it. And even though it's different now than it was then, because it was bombed like so many German cities was, I kind of knew the lay of the land. I knew what it looked like around it. And then I picked Pforzheim for the German village where the dad is from. Not because I had been there, but because it was a town that people hadn't heard of, and it deserves to be remembered, because what happened to Pforzheim really did happen. It was a town full of watchmakers, and in one night it was obliterated in a bombing, because they were all being told to make fuses for bombs. And unfortunately, I mean, it's just really sad. It was a city of civilians, and I thought, that's a city that deserves to be remembered. And no one had ever heard of Pforzheim. At least I hadn't heard of it. So I did call upon my memories of having lived in Germany and England. And then when I had to stretch out to places that I hadn't been to, I did.
Very cool.
Now, you've written quite a
Go ahead, Jen.
You've written quite a few books. Do you ever get them confused or not remember something? Meaning, like, I read so many books, every week, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, did you read this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I cannot tell you what it was about." Does that ever happen with your earlier books?
Yes, I read wonderful books, and all I can remember of them is that I loved them. But I don't know why, and I guess that's just unfortunate because of the limitations of our brain and how many books we read. I do find that I remember the gist of all of my books. Sometimes there'll be somebody who will read something from the way back, and they'll have a question about that, and I'll tell them, "I'm so sorry, but I cannot recall why I did that, or that I did that." But for the most part, I remember the characters. I remember all the main characters, and I remember what they wanted, because that's pretty important. In each story, the character has to want something, and they have to fight to get it. That's the plot line really of every book, and I do remember that. But I know that the more I write, the less I will be able to handle remembering those older books. And I don't want to read them, even though I have them. I don't want to read anything that I've already written, especially the older stuff. Yeah, so I'm always glad when somebody asks me a question about an older book and I can remember the context enough to answer the question.
My first concert I ever went to was Billy Joel, and it was a Q&A at my sister's college. And I had never been to a concert. I was 11, and I remember he came out, and on the piano were binders, and then he started to play from the binder. Like, people, like, in the course of the conversation, a song would be mentioned, and sometimes it was a song that came out like on his first album or on an album that he never played in concert before. And so he'd flip to the page because he couldn't remember them either. Like, when you put so much time into something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to live in your brain forever.
That comforts me to hear that.
It's really cool. He had stacks, and he would just go through and find it for us. It was really fun. It was like the best concert experience ever to have your first concert for. But yeah, it's very understandable when you live with a book for a while and you've gone through so many drafts of it. Things change, and I know I'm an editor, and when I've watched, like, from one sequel edited by somebody, or from one book edited to somebody, and then another editor gets it, and they don't have the continuity because the author forgot the character's name, or the author forgot that the character was a certain age or something, so it happens all the time. You are not alone.
Well, I know a lot of people will reread a book, more than once. In the beginning, I thought, why would I do that? Like, I read it and I know that I liked it, and there's so many books I haven't read that I want to read, but I think it was a book that was for book club, and I thought, gosh, it was so long ago, I need to reread it. And when I reread it, I thought, wow, I did not remember most of this book. I remembered that I liked it, but I didn't really remember, and I actually really enjoyed rereading it.
Yeah.
I'm a rereader.
The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, which is a great book. And I had read it years ago, and then someone picked it for book club, and I knew enough. I remembered loving it, but I didn't remember enough about why I loved it. And I read it again, and I loved it as much the second time, maybe even more. So I've given myself some freedom to reread books that I absolutely loved, and the ones that I liked a lot, but I know I'll probably never read again. I'm learning to give those away. I'm re-gifting those and only holding on, keeping the ones that I absolutely loved, because we were starting to get. I know it sounds, is that possible? But we were getting too many books in the house, and we were running out of room. And now I'm able to part, even with my hardbacks. I'm able to part with them because I read it, I enjoyed it very much, and now I'm giving that book another life with another reader. I feel like I've done the author a favor. I bought their book. I've done myself a favor. I read it, and now I'm doing someone else a favor by giving it to them. And they might give it to somebody else, or sometimes I'll take it down to the library, friends of the library, and they can sell it in their bookstore, and it's good for the library, and it's good for the book because it gets another reader. So I'm learning to think of books that way, as I don't have to hold on to all of them, not even my signed hardbacks. I don't have to keep them all, just the ones that I absolutely loved and think I'll read again.
Now, Susan, is any of your kids authors, or are they big readers since you were?
They're all readers, I'm happy to say. My daughter is an editor, and so she doesn't get to write as much as she probably would like, because she's pretty busy as a freelance editor, but she's a very good writer. And then my son, I have 3 boys. My firstborn son would say he's not a good writer, but he really is. He really is. I think he's just too hard on himself. And then my thirdborn son majored in humanities in college, and he has a master's degree in Celtic literature. So he doesn't write as much as he could, but he's a good writer. And then my lastborn son is a lawyer, and I know they write all the time. Yeah. And so I would say, yes, I would say the writing gene got passed down to all of them in different ways. And my writing gene came from my dad. My dad was a technical writer when he was working. He's retired now, and he never got to write the creative thing that he wanted to write, but I still feel like that the writing thing is a family gift that often is passed on into family members.
Well, when you have people who appreciate reading and writing, that just nurtures that skill for generations. It's not just a once and done kind of deal. So I was going to quickly say, to what you were saying a minute before about your books, like giving away and stuff, and the process of rereading. I think a lot of times when we do reread things, we're at different points in our lives. Yes. And everything that we've experienced from that first time we've read it does inform how we enjoy it and appreciate it.
That's very true. That it depends on what you're facing, the stage you are in your life, how a book will affect you. That's good insight.
Benita wanted to know that have any of your historical fiction stories reflected in your own background or experience? So we touched on that a little bit about the locations, but what more about the stories? Any personal experiences make their way into your books?
I would say for the most part, I've lived a rather easy life compared to what happens to my characters. I always put them in the crucible. And I've not really had to deal with anything that terrible. I've lost family members. I've lost grandparents, but I've never lost a spouse or a child, or had someone I loved die in the war or anything like that. So I would say no, for the most part. I've not experienced the loss that my characters have, but I do give them. I feel like every book has me in it to some degree. And so a lot of times what I will give my characters out of me is my response to that situation. Like, what would I do if that was me? Like Maggie in As Bright as Heaven, she's the middle of 3 girls. And I'm the middle one of 3 girls. And so I gave her a lot of what I thought I would do. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't do everything that Maggie did, but a lot of what Maggie did is exactly what I would have done. Even though I can't talk too much about that book and spoil it, but I've not experienced the loss that Maggie experienced. But I could imagine if I were her, what would I do? And I gave her a lot of those exact same responses.
Is that easier for you to write the response that you know you'd have, or is it easier to create something completely different?
I think I can make it as easy as I want by thinking that way, but I often don't want my characters to read like me. I do want them to feel like they have their own personality, because I wouldn't want every character in my book to sound like they were me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, when I do take the personality tests as if I were those characters. And so, like, if I do the Myers-Briggs, I know I'm an INFJ. So if I give one of my male characters that same test and I answer the questions as if I am him and he pops out INFJ, he either really is or I wasn't thinking like a different person, you know? And so sometimes I feel like if I want him to be different than me, then I'm gonna have to take the test again and think, don't give the knee-jerk reaction to that question. Think about what kind of response that man would have to it.
Very
It's interesting.
Do you just do the Myers-Briggs, or do you do some of the other tests as well?
I did Myers-Briggs for a long time, and now I'm kind of on to Enneagram, so that's the one I do now. And I don't even like
three.
I'm a 2 through and through with a
Two.
and I'm very 2. If you look at anything 2, that is me. I've taken the test 3 different times and it always comes out 2 wing 3. So I know that's pretty much how I function. And I don't even really now, I've gotten to the point now where I don't really have to give the character the test. What I do is I look at the different numbers and I kind of know what they all are now anyway. And I go, oh, you are a 4. I know you're a 1. And so I don't have to take the test. I can look at the different, personality parameters and know, okay, I've got your number. I mean, I really do. I've got your number, and I can anticipate how these characters are going to act and react, based on what I think they are on the Enneagram scale, which eliminates a lot of having to revise because I didn't have continuity. Like if you start out a character a certain way, by the end of the book, well, there's always a character arc, of course, the character has to grow and change a little bit in the book, but some things don't change about us, and the continuity there is important, or otherwise the story isn't believable. And so doing that before I even start writing is helpful to me in that way.
That's very thoughtful. That makes sense. Before we move on to some more of the questions that our audience members have, can you tell us a little bit more about what we can expect from you next year? I believe in January.
Yeah, actually it's February 2.
February.
So
okay.
I'm going to jump from January. And the book, it has a beautiful cover. If you want to hop onto any site that shows books, Goodreads has it. It's called The Nature of Fragile Things. And the idea behind the nature of fragile things is that, if you drop something that is fragile, it'll break. It's the nature of fragile things to shatter when they're dropped. And I want to have us suppose that not everything that looks fragile will break when it's dropped. And not everybody who looks fragile is really fragile. And sometimes you don't know how strong you are until you have to find out how strong you are. So that's the play with the title. And the book itself is about, it's historical fiction. So it starts out in 1905.
I'm shocked that it's historical fiction. I
know.
thought that we were going to get like urban fantasy.
She starts out, I have an Irish immigrant. Her name is Sophie, and she starts out in New York at a terrible tenement in Lower Manhattan. She is not happy for a lot of reasons. There are quite a number of reasons why she wants out of New York, and she's desperate enough to answer a mail order bride ad from a widower in San Francisco who has a 5-year-old little girl. And this man wants a new wife and a new mother for his child. And so she answers it, and she gets on a train and she comes out west. She gets on the Oakland ferry, gets off, meets him, goes to the courthouse, and marries him.
Wow.
Like that. And so she is able to convince herself that she's happy because she has pretty much everything she has long wanted. She was living in a terrible situation. She finally now has a beautiful house to live in, and nice clothes and food every day. And she's able to mother this little girl who does not speak, by the way. it's attributed to the death of her mother 5 months before. But she's able to love this little girl, and she knows she can't have children. She already knows that. So this idea that she can be the mother to this little girl, and she's convinced that she can love that little girl into speaking again. And her husband, he's not mean to her. He doesn't abuse her, but he's different. There's something up with him, and she can't quite figure it out. But she dismisses it because she has everything else that she's always wanted. She's 90% happy until 1906 rolls around, and there's a pretty significant earthquake in San Francisco in 1906. It was huge and devastating and life-changing for pretty much everybody who lived in downtown San Francisco. And an earthquake shakes everything up, and it shakes up her existence too. And nothing is the same after that. And I won't tell you more because it'll spoil it for you, but she's about to find out how strong she is.
We look forward to that.
So how does that sound?
Oh, it sounds lovely.
Amazing.
We're excited.
When you started that book, were you thinking more of going with a story about being a mail order bride, which is, you know, a story amongst itself, or was it more of the earthquake and then you joined this other piece into it?
Yeah, this book was a tough nut to crack because I did start out with, I knew I was using the earthquake. I had picked that as a setting. And so I had this incredibly volatile setting in a beautiful city. And I thought, well, who can I give this setting to? I've got to put somebody in it to take advantage of this very complex, volatile setting. And so I began, peopling it. And my first attempt was terrible. I wrote 40,000 words and I thought I had something. And I sent them to my editor and she goes, this won't work. And I was devastated, but she was right on all counts. So I went back to the drawing board and wrote 25,000 new words with some new characters. And I sent that to her and it was the same thing. She said, it's not working. And that was soul crushing, but she was right. When she told me, she was right on all counts. And so I came home and I was feeling pretty defeated. I felt like a hack, to tell you the truth. I felt like I'd lost my edge. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I really had to double down and figure out who are these characters. And I did have a mail order bride in there, but I think at one point I had her as a picture bride from Japan. And I decided that wasn't my culture. I felt really like, and it was, the Own Voices was just getting started when I was trying to plot this book. And I really felt like I didn't want to appropriate that culture for that book. I'm trying to be sensitive to what people are feeling right now. Like I said, I think the time to be kind is right now. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do a Japanese picture bride. And so I began looking at other types of brides that are like that. And I knew there were mail order brides coming out west. And when I finally decided on Sophie as an Irish immigrant, well, that is my heritage. My mom's family did come from Ireland. And so I'm not appropriating that. It's part of who I am. And then I felt okay to start imagining her, her life, what she wants. She has to want something, right? And then the other just kind of fell into place after I figured out who she was. And that book kind of wrote itself while I was writing it. So I didn't really have a good plan for it. So I just had these characters. Finally, I had characters. And then the book kind of came together as I was writing it. And I love it now. I really do. And my editor loves it too. So I'm really glad she sent me back to the drawing board like twice. It was the third time was the charm. Twice I had to go back and start over with it.
I'm glad you recognize the value of editing. Do you enjoy the editing process or do you prefer the writing process? Do you hate the editing process? Do you hate the writing process but just feel compelled to write? Where do you fall in that?
All of it is good and terrible at the same time. Writing is so hard and so good. So it's the process of writing can be very mentally exhausting, but when you've written it and you feel so good, it's like exercise. It's like, running, like preparing for a marathon, the actual exercising of it. I think there are some people that really enjoy exercise. I don't, but I know that when you're done exercising, you feel great. And that I like. And I think it's kind of like that. And the editing process scares me to death. When I get my revision letter, I always wait to open it until evening, and I get a glass of wine, and then I and I open the email to read my revision letter. And my editor, she's so sweet. She always starts out by saying, "I love this book," and she tells me what she loves about it, which is very smart, because then the rest of it is, here's where it could be better. And then it's a long list of things where I need to get to work. And she doesn't tell me what to do. She just tells me what's not right. So it's still up to me to figure out how to make it right. And that can be frustrating, because I can see what she's saying, but I don't know how to fix it. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you just have to wrestle. I have to wrestle with it and try different things. But usually if she tells me there are 10 big things that are wrong, even though I feel like she's not right on maybe half of them, I will approach it as if she's right on all counts. And I will start to fix those 10 things, even the ones I think are just fine. And when I get to the end, usually 9 out of 10, she's right. I might leave one thing saying, no, I really like it like this. I think it's the way it needs to go. And she'll go, okay. But she's almost always right.
How about copy editing? How do you do with that?
It's okay. I think for the most part, I've got some good copy editors. So I feel like for the most part, they still let me be me. There are occasionally times where I feel like they're starting to insert their own authorial voice into what I've written. But for the most part, I really haven't to fight with any of my CEs on much. And I feel like that's maybe just a testament to who Berkeley has hired for that. Because most of the time I feel like I owe them some gratitude at the end, because they found some things I hadn't thought of, and they needled out something that's not quite right, like logistically. So I don't mind the copy edit process if I get a good copy editor. And I've always gotten one. I've been very lucky.
That's good. I'm glad you've had that positive experience, because we're amazing.
Oh gosh, yes. I would never want to publish anything without having it been edited, never. And the line editing too. I want a good line editor too. All of it is so important. And so I appreciate my editor so much.
Well, I hope they are listening. Have you worked with your same regular editor? Like, it sounded like she's the same person you've been working with for most of your work, right?
No. What happened when Berkeley is my third publishing house.
Okay.
I started.
Oh, that's right. You were with Penguin at some point, right?
Yeah, I made the switch in 2014 from the inspirational market to the general market, and I had a wonderful editor in 2014, and I'm getting probably the years mixed up, but in 2015 or 2016, Penguin and Random House merged. And whenever you have two big companies like that merging, there's always going to be redundancies. And I lost that editor. She retired early, and I got another one, and she was amazing, and I loved her. And then whenever two big companies merge, there are secondary layoffs. And that happened to that editor. It was really sad. I really liked her. And so I was feeling kind of bumpy and scared. I didn't know if I should stay, because I didn't know what was happening, and I was losing my continuity. And my agent was thinking, I don't know, maybe we should think. And we were just trying to decide what to do. And the editor I have now said, don't go anywhere. We want you to stay, and I'll be your editor. And I could tell she wasn't going anywhere. And so she's my editor and has been, and I'm glad I made that choice just to stay. It was worth it. It's tempting to jump ship, when the boat springs a leak, but sometimes the leak can be fixed and you're good, and you continue on your way to that beautiful destination you had planned on going to. So I'm really glad that I did not do anything rash, and that I stayed where I was, because I really feel like they've been wonderful to me, and I have a great editor. And I feel like the longer I stay in the one house, the more I feel like we get each other, and that's important.
I would imagine that makes you feel not safe, but at least more comfortable.
It's not so much a safety, but like security, which I know they do the same, but they're a little different. I feel kind of secure there, even though I know nothing is for certain. I feel like I have like a home there, and that I belong there, and that's nice.
Mm-hmm. Let's see what some of our people have asked. Elisa said, I just finished my first novel and I'm 59, so it's great to hear life experience can be an advantage. Go LA chapter sister.
Hey.
And then Doris asks, who published your first novel and how did that happen?
Oh, the first one was published in 2004 by a small publisher called Harvest House Publishers. They still publish, but they've moved to only nonfiction now, but they published fiction back then. And it was an inspirational house. So the book itself, it kind of had an inspirational message to it. And it wasn't historical fiction. And it was only 77,000 words. And so it was a little thinner and it didn't require as much of me. And I'm amazed actually that I even wrote it because I had no idea what I was doing. And I think I was able to get published just because God was nice to me, because I didn't know anybody. I didn't have an agent and I had never been to a conference. I had no contacts at all, which is not the way you get published. It's good to be networked and go to conferences, and all of the things that you read about how to get published are good to do. So, but I'm glad that house picked me up. It was a smaller house, but they picked me up, and I was naive and new. I didn't know anything. I was writing for a newspaper. That's all I knew. And so I kind of cut my teeth on those first books, and they ended up publishing 9. I wrote 9 books with them, different kinds. I did a couple of mysteries. Those were fun. And so I felt like that was my college degree in writing, was writing for that first publisher, because I kind of figured out how to write with all of those books. And then I moved on to Waterbrook Press, which is a division of Random House. And then in 2014, I moved over to Berkeley at Penguin Random House. And so I feel like all of it kind of prepared me for what I'm doing now.
That's great. Sandy says, I am a teacher, 8 through 12, talented and gifted, and many of my students love to write. Some take part in this scholastic writing contest each year. Some have written books and have asked me how to go about getting published. What do you suggest a student do if it's really good work that they should pursue for publication?
Wow, that's great. I only know about how to get published in like the book industry. I don't know as much about how to get something published that's nonfiction or an essay, but I know there are market guides out there. In fact, when I wanted to get published, when I finally had a manuscript, and usually you don't look towards publication until you have something that's finished and polished. When I knew the book was done and I had made it as good as I could make it, that's when I got the market guide. And there's a market guide, I think, for every kind of writing. There's probably a market guide for young adult and a market guide for general market or whatever.
I have this right
here. There you go. The writer's market that will tell you who is looking for what you have written. So if you've written a science fiction novel, you can get the market guide and it'll tell you, because they update it every year, which publishers are looking for science fiction, because not all of them are. In fact, some of them say, do not send us any science fiction. And so it's good to get the market guide, because not only it tells you who wants it, but it tells you who not to send it to, because I mean, why waste reaching out to a publisher that doesn't want what you're writing and get rejected? You're going to get rejected enough anyway. We all do when we're trying to get our work published. So you want to, reach out to the ones that are looking for what you've written, so that there'll be fewer rejections, and then you might even find one that wants what you've written.
And that goes for not just students starting out, anyone who's starting out looking to get published. And as you mentioned before, going to conferences and writing groups, that's a big key in the networking aspect.
All of that helps you break in, if that's what you're wanting to do. It's not enough just to have written something. You also want to be a part of the writing world. And so part of that is being engaged with other writers groups, with other writers, going to conferences, all of that. It all helps you break in.
Finding groups on social media or participating in chats on social media, all of that, and literary agents and always have their submission calls and things like that you can find on social media too.
If you're connecting with those people, if you're connecting with the industry experts that are already in social media, then once you're connected and following them, then you find out things. You find out where they're going to be, what conferences they're going to be at, and what they're looking for, and it just helps you broaden your knowledge. and knowledge is always power.
Yes. Nancy says, I love the cover of this book. I know that authors often don't have much to say about the cover. Do you like that cover as much as I do?
I love the cover. It's perfect. It's perfect. And I have nothing to do with it. Like really nothing. They'll ask me at cover time, like when they're just starting to formulate, an idea for the cover. Do you have any ideas for the cover? And I can never envision what I don't know. I don't know. And so I'll show them covers of books that I like. Like I'll say, well, I like this person's cover and I like this person's cover because I can't envision my own.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can't think that way. I wish I could, but I don't. And so, and I think sometimes that helps them find out what I think the flavor of the book is. Like if you look at mysteries, the font is a certain kind of font for mysteries. It's block letters and they're often white, and it's just the look of mysteries and thrillers, And so I send them things I think are a little more literary, a little more, emotional, like some pathos involved. And so maybe that helps them. But what I sent them for this one doesn't look anything like what we've got. So what they did, of course, is they just paid attention to what I thought the feel of it was, and they gave me this, and it's perfect.
I think that all of your covers that I've seen have been lovely.
Yeah, I've been very, very grateful. It's this one gal at Berkeley who does it. Her name is Colleen, and she's amazing. She gets I don't think she has time to read all the books she designs for. So she must pay attention to like what she's told about it. And I mean, really pay attention because she gets it every time.
Well, I mean, we all know the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do. And when you open the book, you have a certain feeling that you're expecting this book to evoke in some way. It's like a nebulous thing, but if you start reading it and it's completely different, it's jarring and it can take you out of the experience. Same with like, if you have a character in a book who has a certain hair color, like a redhead, and then like the cover has a blonde, like that's going to bother readers. We are very picky people. We know these details about our characters.
I think with reason. I think the cover should speak to the story. I don't think it's asking too much for the cover and the book to be compatible. Mm-hmm.
I agree. So does Nancy, I think. Sandy says, it seemed like in your story, life at the camp was actually nicer than life in Iowa after Elise's father was taken away. Would you say that was accurate in real life, that the prisoners were actually treated fairly well?
Well, they had all of their needs met, but that does not mean that they were free. They had their needs met, but if they tried to leave, they'd be shot. So that to me right away says things were not fine. They had their needs met, but if they left, they would be shot. So it's like, in Iowa, people probably were living with rations, but they could go out their front door and take a walk. They could go to the next city over. They could read a newspaper front to back. They could send their mail and know that it wouldn't be opened by anyone but the person they addressed it to. And so, the people living at the internment camp had no radios, no newspaper. Their mail was censored going in. It was censored going out. And they could not leave. All of them lost homes and jobs. And so, they weren't making the salaries they were making on the outside. And they often couldn't do what they did on the outside. If you were a heart surgeon and you were all of a sudden interned at Crystal City, I can guarantee you weren't doing heart surgery anymore. You were probably sewing up skinned knees and broken bones, maybe delivering babies or whatever. And so having your needs met, I think, is just that. It's just having your needs met. But freedom is something entirely different and amazing and wonderful. And I'm not sure we know how awful it is not to have it until we're denied it. And we're denied it a little bit right now. We don't have the freedom. Like if you wanted to go, I don't think you can go to Paris right now if you live in the United States. I think the borders are closed. So forget it. If you wanted to go to Canada right now, forget it. And if you wanted to go, like here where I live, you can't go anywhere without a face mask. You can't. And so I think we're starting to feel what it's like to be restricted, but the restrictions placed on them, I feel, even though they had their needs met, were so severe that that it could not be seen better by any of the adults. Maybe some of the children thought it was more fun, but they were living a child's life. You know, it wasn't the same as it was for their parents.
And right now, while we do feel those restrictions and we can't do everything we want to do, we know that by doing this, we're helping other people.
Right.
Whereas when you're in an internment camp, you're not voluntarily helping the world not be afraid of Germans.
No, that is so true. And they were all there because they were suspected of being sympathizers to the enemy nations. And a lot of them weren't, you know, a lot of them were loyal to the United States. And so for them, it probably felt like, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. And, you know, why can't you see that I mean nothing but the best for my adopted country? But you can't prove what you feel. And so there they stay.
Jessica would like to know, are the former internees, and I would guess extend that to their families, bitter about having been sent there?
Some are. And I've read memoirs by those who were bitter. Some people were not. Some people who were repatriated came back. You know, that Japanese man that I met at one of my signings here in San Diego, he and his family were repatriated to Tokyo. And in the 1950s, they came back. And he had a big smile on his face. And he said his parents were able to forgive and forget. Mm-hmm. I think for some people, it was too hard. It probably all depends on your personality and maybe exactly what happened to you. You know, I think for some lost more than others. Some respond to loss differently than others. The man that I mentioned to you, I became friends with, who lives in Long Island, who was my go-to person. He didn't even know that they were interned until he was in his 30s. Because all he remembered about that time in his life when he was 5, 6, and 7 is that they lived in the desert. That's really all he remembers about it. His parents didn't tell him because they were so embarrassed about what happened to them. They didn't tell their kids. And so he was finally like in his late 30s, and his dad finally told him. And when he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And his dad said, "I was ashamed. I was ashamed of what happened." So I think there was probably the gamut, you know, of reactions to what happened, depending on your personality and how much you lost and how much your life changed afterward.
Angela wants to know, do you know if the Germans sued the U.S. government after war for retribution as the Japanese Americans did?
There have been movements. There's a movement to get even a formal apology they would be happy with. The Civil Rights Act of 1988, I think that's when it was, that President Reagan signed, that is the one you're talking about, where they got reparations to the tune of, I think it was $20,000 per individual, and a formal apology only applied to the Japanese Americans, not to German Americans. And so they've applied at different times with different congressmen to get at least a formal apology, and it's never gone past the floor. And I don't really know why. They didn't lose en masse like so many of the Japanese Americans. If you've read the book, my book, then you know that like what happened in Little Tokyo and LA is a little different than what happened to these individual families, these individual German American families. What happened in Little Tokyo and LA and all up and down the West Coast was these people were forcibly evacuated, and they had to leave their businesses and homes and take one suitcase. That's all you could take. And when they came back, if they could come back, they came back to people living in their homes and people squatting in their businesses. Some of them had lost everything. And so the scale of loss seemed greater to a great many Japanese Americans compared to the German Americans. Maybe that's part of it. But they've got a group called the German American Internee Coalition. They have a lovely website, and you can get news updates on that site about how that effort is going. So far, I think there might be another bill before, like right now it's probably stalled because of COVID. I think there's another bill before the House to get that formal apology. I think they try every year, and they've not been successful.
Well, hopefully they will be in the future.
Yeah.
Sandy says, thank you for writing about human relationships. We talked about in book club the other night about how it helps people develop empathy when they read a book like this. Please keep writing books like this.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
And then she also had said, these are things that I can tell my students about to use as topics for National History Day, because you are right. They are still not taught about these topics in regular history classes today.
Right.
Yay, National History Day. I competed. I loved it.
Oh, thanks.
So I think that's it. Thank you so much. I know we've gone way over the time that I expected, but thank you very much for being so generous with your time.
My pleasure. You asked great questions, and I was really, really happy to be chosen for the book club. So thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed the book, and if you haven't read it yet, that now you'll want to. And yeah, this has been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we look forward, maybe we will be able to have your next book on our Great Group Reads list. And we'll be able to have you back.
That would be fun. We'll do this again. That would be great fun.
All right. For those of you who are members, we will be sending out a recording, the link to the recording, so you can watch and share it with other members and non-members, because this event actually was open to everyone. So share all the love for Susan and her books. And we'll have a link in tomorrow's email with some of the links to buy her books. So look for that. And then I just want to quickly throw up this screen so we can have people see how they can get in contact with you if they want. There's her website address, and then you can also follow her on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And tell everybody you know how wonderful she is. Oh, and because we like to be kind to our authors, please leave reviews for her books. Share the love that way so that people know just how wonderful these books are. Yeah. So then, oh, I forgot. And I forgot this one last screen. This is our thank you screen. So thank you all for attending. And thank you, Susan, so much again. And I hope that you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks. Same to all of you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. If you are not a member of the WNBA, we invite you to become members. We have author talks regularly, and we also have the Bookwoman Book Club. And we will be doing lots more programming in the future that I think you should come and check out. So you can learn more about us by signing up for our Bookwoman emails. And I hope everybody had a lovely evening. Take care.